Welcome to Trustworthy AI, de-risking adoption of AI. I'm Pamela Gupta, your host, and I'm here talking to Jim Reavis, a well-known entity that I don't have to introduce, but I will nevertheless do a couple of lines of intro. Before we do that, I'd like to talk about the topic today, which is enterprise agentic AI governance and security. This is not only a current topic, but it has carries high implications and a large impact when it comes to risk as well as security. So there is a lot of urgency surrounding this as we see the adoption of agentic AI skyrocket, basically. So we can look at some of those figures as to how enterprises are adopting, what is the adoption rate, etc., and that does drive the risk and the urgency to mitigate, identify those risks, and mitigate them. So let's welcome our guest, Jim Reavis. Jim, as you know or may not know, but is a co-founder of Cloud Security Alliance, which is extremely well known and highly valued in the community of cybersecurity. He launched CSA in 2009 and has led its global growth and positioned it as among the most vital cybersecurity communities worldwide. Under Jim's stewardship, CSA has made tremendous strides in security best practices for cloud and for emerging technology that I'd like to ask Jim about, such as quantum computing, IoT, blockchain, zero trust, and now generative AI. CSA recently launched CSA's AI Safety Initiative. So, welcome, Jim. And what did I miss out?
Oh, I think that you captured things pretty well. And just I would add that, sort of the superpower of Cloud Security Alliance is we've been able to get a global community of just really smart researchers. Probably we've tracked maybe 15,000 that have contributed meaningfully to research over our almost 17 years now. So I sometimes get to take credit for it, but really it's that community. And so I'm delighted to be here. It's sort of long overdue to be able to chat with you, a noted expert in AI, which is an area I'm more of a recent entrant into it. But again, using that community, I think we've been able to get up to speed and actually do some great things in a short amount of time.
Why, thank you. And we appreciate everything that you bring to us. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what is agentic AI governance and security and what is the urgency surrounding it. So leading out with the first question to you, you've written about some of the pressure in today's innovation pace around traditional assurance, frameworks, guidance, standards that we have. What makes agentic AI such a critical inflection point for security and trust frameworks?
Yeah, from my perspective, we've gone from a world when I started in computers and cybersecurity where we would maybe change our software once a year or every couple of years to where with cloud you would change things maybe daily. And agentic AI, it's so interesting in that it's almost changing itself with every action that it's asked to take. And so this continuous dynamic nature continues to just put pressure on how human beings understand assurance and compliance, which are often very much point in time activities. We understand continuous a lot more than we used to. And we understand that we've got to have a human in the loop, and we've got to be able to communicate things and understand that they're going to evolve quite a bit. But the agentic sort of dynamic nature, the autonomy, obviously, or agency, however you'd want to sort of put a finer word on that, and the fact that like if you talk to the people who are developers, scientists who've created some of these models and the emergent capabilities and the things that surprise them tell us that we've got to like rethink maybe or at least augment significant ways how we think about like understanding trustworthiness, compliance, how we govern. There's definitely going to need to be a lot of new things, and I'm not going to claim that we figured all of that out yet, but it's a very important journey we have to do right now because from a business imperative, businesses are looking to gain that competitive edge by being early with agentic. And I talk to a lot of organizations that say we are definitely getting our cybersecurity budget cut, or we've got mandates that it's got to actually support some of these newer initiatives. So there's pressure from the risk perspective, from the financial perspective, and from us just all trying to keep up and see is a round peg in a square hole we're trying to do with our existing frameworks, and where do we need to like innovate and think of new ways of doing this.
Right. The couple of things you said there, Jim, that I want to kind of highlight and kind of delve into a little bit. So, do I understand it correctly that you're seeing companies and organizations deflect or divert funds from areas such as cybersecurity into the innovative aspects of AI, such as agentic AI?
Yeah, so there's multiple things, and different organizations can characterize it differently. Some of them are being told to make sure that you are allocating a portion of your cybersecurity budget to specifically looking at how you support AI initiatives in the organization. Also, how do you use agentic AI to maybe change security itself? And we're seeing some of those sorts of things like in security operation centers. But there's some different pressures to be accountable, and so you are seeing in some cases where okay, we got to do more with less now, or we've got to make sure that we're modernizing in the right way. And so people are like looking at that and interpreting it in different ways and making sure they're managing the risks. But we're seeing also a lot of like agentic, either proof of concepts all the way up to like production usage of real agents. And so it's definitely it's a brave new world right now.
Yes, I do agree with that. And I think that only underscores the urgency around understanding the risks of, what agentic AI brings to the cybersecurity and more broadly to the trustworthiness of AI. If we're going to put them or provide them even more higher footprint, right? To your point, the if the pressure is coming around putting them in areas where we can cut costs, right? In order to do that, we want to be able to trust them, right? Make sure that what we have is what we are expecting is what we're going to get. And if we don't address those risks, then that's going to be a misplaced focus, I would
Yep.
say.
And there's
So,
tools like model context protocol that like people are racing, and you're seeing all these different MCP servers and clients out there, and kind of happened before we had a really clear security framework around how to go do those things. So it's a big part of we're sort of building the agentic runway as the agentic plane is like taking off.
right, right. Yes, oddly enough, MCP came from Anthropic, and it's the first time, there hasn't been that much of a back and forth or a tug of war between who gets to set the standard. It became so widely adopted by even the competitors, right? Microsoft, you name it, all the model providers kind of adopted MCP and A2A fairly
Mhm.
quickly, which has never happened, right? Because it is the only a leading standard in that identifying how agents work, how they operate, etc. And of course, we could do an entire segment on the security for just MCP, right? What are the risks that we want to be able to integrate the risk mitigation and the awareness when you create a solution with MCP.
Mhm.
But before, if we have time, we'll go into that. But before we go into that level of detail, do you have a vantage point from CSA about any other types of risks emerging as organizations adopt the autonomous or highly autonomous nature of agentic AI system rollout?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a question of alignment with an organization's existing governance. It's down to like very detailed like security controls that might exist. And so the nature of what we're learning about generative AI and prompt injection, data poisoning, all these sorts of things, there are real questions on the alignment and would you have a chat bot. And there's been like sort of humorous but like telling sort of examples like the Air Canada chatbot that was like convinced to like give away airfare for close to free. But the idea of these systems being being sort of grounded in certain principles, policies, controls, can that be bypassed by this sort of this merging together with the generative AI of your data plane and your control plane and have like different ways of like getting sort of unexpected results out of this. So it kind of goes from like very like technical specific things like could you get a payment system that has an agentic approver in it to bypass controls by sending instructions inside of an invoice, for example, is kind of an interesting sort of use case. Up to like, can you have it like basically disobey broad governance principles, regulatory compliance, sort of constitutional bylaws that might exist in an organization. So it's a lot of the things that we expect from a governance perspective to uh, work and flow down to the organization, and sort of at any level from a highly technical sort of breach up to just broad principles. There are concerns that will the AI system do things in a way that's not expected, and so that's why we've got to really understand like can we explain things? Can we have the guardrails in place where we are able to measure where we diverge? Can we sort of explain that? Because not using it's not an option. This is we're moving forward into this, and so we're kind of learning, to sort of answer the question. We're kind of learning how much of those are more theoretical risks and which are the ones that are more practical. And I think of us needing to like have the broad governance principles, which we try to do with a lot of our work. But also, I'm trying to think more and more about there's a control plane with from an operational perspective. What's the agentic control plane look like, and what are some of the things we need to like really be looking at now? And I think something like payments, for example, agentic payments is probably something we need to have a real focus
Mhm.
on right now and come up with those best practices. But I'm kind of curious from your perspective. I mean, you've kind of saw sort of pre-generative AI up to AI, and I know you've developed like your tips and 8 pillars for trustworthy AI, and like how does that is that like from a framework perspective? Do you feel that's actually meeting the challenge of new things that Agentic is bringing to us?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I want to just mention one thing though from what you said for the listeners to appreciate the complexity of agentic AI security and trustworthiness, which is that difference between the control plane that you mentioned, right? The control plane and the action plane, because that may not be very obvious to, because I talk to a lot of people who are developing, rolling out agentic AI, or doing validations, etc. And it's not very clear that, as we are building these agents on top of already something that has not been perfected in terms of security, for example, generative AI models, you're building something on top of something that is already insecure. So how do you put your arms around that, and how do you take a very systematic approach to know what you're going in for?
Mhm.
By the way, I do want to talk about some of those examples you gave of some of the, like the Canadian Airlines, etc. But the question that first, let me answer about the trustworthiness and that AI tips model that I had created for operationalizing risk. That rests on 8 pillars of security and privacy being at the very foundation, and then approaching things that are unique, issues that are unique to AI, such as bias, explainability, and transparency. These are things that are expectations that we, or requirements that we have to be able to prove and identify in AI, so that we are not putting extra burden of risk, right?
Right.
Of not knowing how they're making a decision. For example, explainability. Why are they? What is the algorithm that you've chosen? What is, having that transparency? So the 8 pillars again: security, privacy, bias-free, transparency, explainability, and accountability, which is extremely, extremely important, as you know, Jim, in our world of cybersecurity. And also, one additional element I'd included in that was regulations, because after all, if regulations, whether they are existing or new regulations related to AI, do play a very big role in how we approach that entire operationalization of creating a controls framework around systems.
Yep.
So going to how does that, how do you fit that model, that AI tips model for agentic AI? It's very, very much applicable, in fact, more so as we look at what are the context-based risk for the rollout. So let's take a quick look at what agentic AI would look like, because agentic AI represents an advancement in autonomous systems, right? Increasingly enabled by large language models, for example, and generative AI, other aspects of generative AI as well. So even though we had agentic AI, which was predates modern LLMs, integrating them, of course, now significantly increases that risk, expands their scale, the capabilities, but also the associated risk, right? And to your point earlier about that not having that protection from the control plane being different from the action plane, right? That's something that we have to look at through that lens of that trustworthiness. So what does that mean? For example, an intelligent, an AI agent which has a high level of autonomy, to know what are the integration points, what are the firstly the elements such as the memory, the orchestration layer, etc. All that's going to be very important. What tools it has access to, what boundaries we can create around that. All that we can do, with the systematic approach. But it's also something that, we can apply frameworks for making sure that it's consistent. So I'll just give you one example. In the recent couple of months, for example, it talked about Copilot, for example, which is part of the AI stack, tech stack for a lot of companies. And not that I would say that, I want to put in one particular vendor, a tech giant under microscope, but or as the focal point. But the fact is, that agentic AI, the more autonomy we give it, the more we have to know where the risk comes from. So in this particular case, Copilot from Microsoft, which is part of the standard stack now, almost was compromised to be able to carry out a zero-click attack,
Hmm.
which is really something that we have to be very, very careful about. As to this is not just another attack that we have to think about, that we'll put in some controls for. It's very significant because in this case, a perpetrator sent a calendar invite to a person, to a user in an organization. And because Copilot had access in this particular case to SharePoint and other repositories of data, it actually executed on what was in that calendar invite and was able to exfiltrate data out without any action. The user didn't even know that there was a such a, it hadn't even clicked on that email, okay, or the calendar invite. Anthropic just came out with a threat intelligence report. So there are, yes, in fact, I would say that AI tips and the operationalization of trust is very much a part of addressing the risks and operationalizing the governance. But I'd like to turn the question back to you, right?
Yeah.
Um, how do for the next question, for example, let's take a look at, really want to understand from your perspective, how do we differentiate, or do we need to differentiate between conventional cybersecurity measures and standards that we have in place, such as SOC 2, right, or ISO 27001? And do do we put those aside, and or how do we integrate that into the overall AI cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah. So there's, I think, a couple different like alternative futures we can imagine here. I think the path that we are going down is to look at which of these frameworks are have incorporate high level principles that you can sort of populate with very rich AI specific operational controls, and then use that combined corpus as the way that you do your assurance, auditing, compliance checks, and then find how you can like do a lot of automation so that you sort of evolve from the auditor that's doing like a SOC 2 attestation or doing an ISO certification, that they are really the human in the loop, managing that sort of process, looking at it. And you could imagine an auditor of the future, not with a client doing this once a year, but having it run like all the time, and then maybe at the end of every day sort of look at the results and say, okay, let's make this adjustment in the system, have it run again to make sure we're really capturing those sorts of risks. So the other alternative is that we just like we sort of start over with some core principles here and really think about continuous monitoring, automation, and either way, I think you're going to see the industry look a lot different in how it does this, and that we are going to see the humans doing a lot more like analysis of the results of automated audits, and not actually doing all the data gathering themselves. It's going to be a lot more analytical, which I think is good. So, you're just going to you'll have maybe the same number of people, but like they're going to be doing a much larger number of these point in time, which there also will be rules based things and triggers that will like really make this be more continuous than just very frequent points in time. So at the end of the day, like we need high level principles, and those they may be things that we can have in SOC 2, or maybe we'll look at the EU AI Act and look at other sort of regulations. Those will inform more of a continuous, mostly AI driven in terms of testing things, asking for evidence, asking for a screenshot. It's going to be AI talking to AI, and probably a lot of like that, with the human in the loop just at the right checkpoints to make sure that that works. But I think the starting point right now is definitely going to be, let's use ISO 42001 for an AI management system, and let's marry that with a security controls framework. If that's not enough, combine that with ISO 27001 and have your ISMS framework be very AI and agentic. And so you could see a merger of those two, and that could be a very common thing. So we're going to start with what we know, and we're going to evolve. And then at the end of the day, it's going to look very different, I think, in practice.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have a pretty deep experience with both 27001 and 42001. So it is coming, from different perspectives, but there are some commonalities in terms of how do you create that management system, right? Which is the starting point. So, Jim, actually, this is a great segue into from going what we need to how building that AI native assurance. Um, what can you tell me about CSA's STAR program
Yeah,
and
sure.
and also the AI safety program?
Oh, sure. So our STAR program has been around for, 14 years, and it's been a combination of self-assessments that cloud providers could do, as well as third-party audits. And there's both a SOC 2 and an ISO 27001 flavor based on our controls matrix for cloud. And so we've been moving on that direction for a couple of years on, okay, now we need STAR really for AI. And if you play it out a few more years, well, is there going to be any cloud that doesn't have AI? But cloud is, because it's the primary way that you are able to deliver generative AI. That's the major platform. It made a lot of sense for us to look at sort of iterating our platform. And so a couple of sort of twists as well. We've needed to contextualize all of the cloud controls for AI. And so now when you think about like an input validation control in your software development, it is to like help prevent those things like prompt injection and things like that. So we need that controls framework that is both AI aware and then AI specific on specific model security types of controls. So we started with that, and then we've been working on, because practicing what I'm preaching. How can you use these models to actually go look at assertions that a company would make and actually do sort of that first line of auditing that a human would review? And we've been pleasantly surprised at how you can train these like major foundation models with like the right content to understand implementation and auditing guidelines. And so that's something we call validated, that we just rolled out a couple of months ago, and a few providers have gone through it, and they found it's been pretty challenging actually, that it's maybe catching things that an auditor would they may not like flag, unless like the scope was very clear that they've got to look at this as like, hey, these are potentially catastrophic risks and things like that. So we see that as being something that's going to be a key tool, and probably a precursor to doing that third party audit with like experts that are really good at, if it's doing the 42001 plus 27001. So we're designing this to be sort of very flexible and living, and let's bring in the higher level conformance frameworks and principles that might come out of NIST or ISO or the European Union. Let's marry that with a very specific operational controls, which we provide. And then let's also add in the AI technologies to do as much of that work as possible. So that's Star for AI, essentially, that we are building to go do that, and we are releasing the different pieces. And we're talking months, not years, before we have basically a pretty complete version 1 of that. But the initial sort of results we've been happy with, but it's getting people to do this more continuously. There's some more scaffolding that the industry is going to need to build. It's not going to be all us, but we're building a framework, at least, that it's possible to build that scaffolding to do this more continuously.
That's excellent. That's a really valuable, very much needed, and a valuable exercise and offering. So please send me the details for how the audience members who are interested can get involved, or even get access to the guidance that you have produced. So I think that'll be a very, very valuable thing to have in their hands. And also, if they can reach out to you or your organization for help with that auditing, etc. So just to conclude, Jim, I know we are getting close to, or we have actually exceeded our time. In terms of the future of governance, innovation, and collaboration, you're championing, you have been a champion of security, responsibility. What do you see as a role of collaboration between standards like CSA and enterprises in creating or co-creating even an AI native security framework? Do you see a security framework, and can be, beyond security? As we know, we've been talking about trustworthiness, which includes security, but is, we need a holistic approach. So what are your thoughts on that as we conclude?
So the ultimately the large enterprises with have huge amounts of data that maybe are not even reflected anywhere in the corpus that an OpenAI or an Anthropic have, that are all internet accessible. They have so much information and so much use cases, so much complexity, that I think the challenge is, do we reflect that? And there often has been a bias in the creation of technical standards that the technology companies themselves have a larger voice in this, whether it's the bits and bytes, or it goes up to governance levels. And so what's the partnership that I think we'd ideally all like to see, and it's not just for CSA, but that we are understanding the use cases, and we're understanding the pain points of enterprises more fully. And I think I could point to, there was a letter from the CISO at JP Morgan Chase that went out a few months ago that was saying, hey, we've got some systemic issues from the technology space. And one of the examples was Agentic, that when I'm installing an email summarization tool from AI, I have to click to allow it complete access, including
Hmm.
deleting all of my emails. And there's a more nuanced, sophisticated way that enterprises look at their entitlements and policy enforcement on a technology layer. And so enterprises helping get the standards that they want is really important. We can believe what we think they need and what's important, but there's a big difference from them being the key stakeholders and making sure, yeah, the AI controls matrix that CSA builds, that reflects what we need, or we need to go further in different areas, or we need to help understand these are the risks that would be catastrophic to our company and maybe our country. And so these are the things that we really need to highlight from a risk-based perspective. So, I think that's sort of where the intersection is. And we do get some of that. I think we could always benefit from getting a lot more as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Jim. That's really valuable. And I'd like to say, as a conclusion, start with something, conclude with something that you had started with, which is saying that, agentic AI is part of the problem and part of the solution, right? We are looking at the risk, but we're also looking at it as helping us solve for some of those key and really complex areas where we have either too much data, we have too much large surface that we cannot handle manually. So we will be looking to make these agents, agentic AI implementations and AI agents to be trustworthy and really, examine them from a risk perspective and de-risk it. So thank you so much. And I think we have to have a follow-up session because I don't think we've covered all areas that we could have. So looking forward to that.
I would be delighted to do that. Thank you so much for your leadership in the industry, Pamela. And thanks for having me on here. And yes, let's continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. Okay.
All right.